I want to say something before I go into my actual review for Space Jam: The New Legacy. Before this movie was actually like released, before I saw a trailer of it, I thought it was fake. Like I had heard there was all these rumors about, oh, they're going to do Space Jam 2 with LeBron James, and it sounds like such made up stuff, right? Because ever since LeBron James joined the league, he has been compared to Michael Jordan. So the idea of LeBron James starring in a Space Jam sequel just seems too fitting of that narrative. And that continues to this day because even up until last year, even this year, how many times on SportsCenter will you see Stephen A. Smith and these guys constantly talking about LeBron and comparing him to Michael Jordan? It's literally every year to the point where I'm so sick of it. LeBron can't even be LeBron. He has to be compared to MJ. In fact, they compare everyone to MJ. And this movie's not going to help that. But interestingly enough, the movie did take a direction I was not expecting in comparison to the original film. And unfortunately, we're going to have to compare it. Because no matter how much the movie tried to be different, and it really didn't that much, but it did in some ways, it's always going to be compared to the original Space Jam. The original Space Jam is like a time capsule movie of the 90s. Even though LeBron James might be the most popular basketball player of the current era and one of the best, he's no Michael Jordan. And I don't mean that as far as skill goes. I mean as far as fame and notoriety. Michael Jordan was and maybe still is the most famous athlete maybe of all time. I mean, you got Babe Ruth, you got Muhammad Ali, you got Mike Tyson. All these guys were famous, but Michael Jordan is internationally famous. Like, think about that for a minute. Like, who could really touch on Michael Jordan? And unless you were around back in the day, it's just, you're not going to understand it. And so also with the Looney Tunes, like, I'm a kid that was born in the 80s, raised mostly in the 90s. So I saw a lot of Looney Tunes. But kids nowadays don't really watch Looney Tunes. So I'm thinking to myself before this movie comes out, who is the target audience? Is it LeBron fans? Is it basketball fans? Is it Looney Tunes fans? And now after seeing the film, the answer to that question is they tried to appeal to everyone. And although I am not sure if it worked, going into this film I expected a complete train wreck. And to be honest with you, it really was not a complete train wreck. No doubt about it. There were some things about this movie that were legitimate cringe. There were some scenes in this movie that were cringe. There's a scene near the end of the movie with Porky Pig where I just rolled my eyes. It was just so bad. There are jokes in this movie that are incredibly cheesy. The movie comes off like a 90s after school special. But yet, I didn't hate it. It really was not as bad as I was expecting. And believe it or not, there's actually a few things about this movie I kind of liked. Truthfully speaking, there are some funny scenes, there are some wacky characters, and again, I go back to me being a Looney Tunes fan. But this movie's not about plot. You can't go into this film expecting it to be anything more than what it is. And if you do, you are a damn fool. We have to look at this movie for what it is. It's a movie that is meant to entertain while also simultaneously being a 2 hour self-masturbatory session for Warner Brothers, because that's what this was. There are so many cameos in this movie from Warner Brothers properties. Everything Warner Brothers owns, from Harry Potter to The Mask to various different versions of Batman. Adam West Batman got representation. Tim Burton Batman got representation. Animated series Batman got representation. To all the different Looney Tunes from different eras. Iron Giant, Kong, even like It was represented here. Even some franchises that I forgot were even owned by WB. Like, I forgot that Gremlins was a WB movie. They get representation here. Mostly in the big finale. Space Jam: The New Legacy is a movie that is very strange to review, because there's not a lot of movies like it. The movie stars LeBron James, who plays himself, and he has a son named Dom. And the story here is that Dom wants to be a video game designer and LeBron James wants him to play basketball. This leads into a wacky story where LeBron James and his son are trapped in the virtual world, the Warner Brothers serververse, and have to play a life or death, well, kind of life or death basketball game to not only free themselves from this, but to save all of the tunes from being deleted. So the stakes are a bit higher than they were in the first film, just a tad. But the problem is you're not going to tap into the same charm as Space Jam, nor are you going to tap into the same soundtrack. That Space Jam soundtrack from the 90s was one of the greatest of all movies. Every song on that thing was a banger. On this one, not so much. And even though I think LeBron James might be a tad bit of a better actor than Michael Jordan, I'll be honest with you on that. He was a little bit better, a little bit more believable. It really is sort of rehashing the same thing for the modern age, but also lacking the heart and really just the impact of the first film. The first movie was a huge movie, dude. That's why this movie's being made. And parts of this movie felt heartless, and even though they tried to make it have some heart, parts of it did feel like just a bunch of schlock. Just like you're supposed to, in the film, instead of relating to the characters, which you can to a degree, even though the storyline is very, very predictable, it's also a thing where, as you view it, the whole gimmick is that by the end, when you see the big basketball game, you're pointing and you're looking at all the cameos. Oh, look, there's the Penguin from Batman Returns. Oh, look, there's Burt Ward, his Robin. Look at this, look at that. For me, my favorite moment of the film was the 2D animation segment. There's like 3 different types of animation in this film. Like 3 different types of, not animation, but 3 different types of, I guess, like aesthetics. You've got the real life LeBron James, like the guy himself, you know, and his family and the real world. You've got the CGI, like serververse that was mostly used in the finale, in the big climax. And then you've got like the 2D Looney Tunes style, which was my favorite. The animation in this movie is clean. And so is, honestly, I gotta give them credit for that. The film, production-wise, is great. And there are so many little cameos here. It literally is one of those, look, I know what that is. Look, I know what that is. The Tim Burton Batman music was played. There's a whole scene that's like a big love fest of the Bruce Timm DC animated shows that I grew up loving. There's segments where there's inside jokes that reference The Matrix and even reference the first film multiple times, even though this is not canon to the first film. It's like the first movie never happened, but there is like a wink wink joke in there. And it's a lot to take in. Visually, it's crazy. Production-wise, it's crazy. But it's not really a film that I'm going to be revisiting. And some folks criticize the original, but the original, there was something about the original Space Jam. It just was such it couldn't have come out in any other decade but the 90s, right? This movie, I don't know how we're going to view this movie in 10, 20 years. I really don't. I didn't hate it, though. There are some parts of this movie that are legit funny. Don Cheadle plays the villain of the movie, which is Al G. Rhythm, who's basically this lonely program who it ends up being the one to torture LeBron and his family throughout the film and threaten to put an end to Platoon Squad. The basketball game in this movie was so over the top. It was like a video game. In fact, the movie really was a big video game. It's based on it being a video game that LeBron's son is designing. But one of the things I found really weird is they tried to play LeBron up as being this kind of dad who doesn't really understand games. You know, like an older father who doesn't really get games. And that's BS because LeBron James is my age. Or we're the same age. And I know LeBron, obviously he's a basketball player. I know he's a huge star and an athlete. But you mean to tell me that a kid born in 1984 doesn't know about video games and how they work? I don't believe that. We all grew up in a world where Nintendo was king, and then we had the console wars, for a while. Then we had Sony come in, then Microsoft. Y'all know the history of gaming from the 80s and on. LeBron was part of that. You mean to tell me LeBron didn't play video games when he was younger? And in the movie, there's parts where they play him up like he doesn't really understand. And that was weird to me. Like, he's not that old, guys. It's not like it was Michael Jordan in the mid-90s. This is LeBron James in 2021. The movie did feel very heartless. It felt very corporate. That is what I'll say. It did feel very corporate. Now, with that being said, Don Cheadle is awesome. He is hilarious in this movie. He hams it up start to finish, so you will enjoy him. The Looney Tunes are great. It's good to see Bugs Bunny, Sylvester, the Roadrunner and the Coyote, Porky Pig, even though he had that one really cringe scene. Daffy Duck was the coach. Like, it's good seeing them. Lola Bunny, different. You know, maybe not as likable as in the first film, despite the change in her physique, if you know what I mean. But it really did feel like a movie trying to copy another movie. And there's a scene at the very end that doesn't make any sense either. But again, this is supposed to be a big cartoon extravaganza, so not much is going to make sense. But at the same time, it is, I think, worth watching just for the cameos. Just to look at who the hell shows up in that final game. But it really is a one and done movie. I'm not so sure if kids are going to like this movie, dude. They're probably going to enjoy some of the 2D animation stuff, but the finale, like the final basketball game, a lot of it came off really boring and it dragged. Like, the movie's about 2 hours, and the last basketball game's an hour in. That's where it starts. So they get a full sequence. But it felt like it went on forever. It really did. So to me, even though I did not dislike this movie, I know I sound like I did, but I didn't. It was not a horrible film. There are good points of it. It's probably worth watching at least once. It just seems like a pointless movie. It really does. That's how it came off to me. Like a movie that some folks are going to watch it and say this was a waste of time. Others are going to say I had fun. And I did have fun. Don't get me wrong. I had fun watching some of it, but it's not a movie that I think I'm going to probably ever own or one I'm ever going to really covet as being even a good movie. There's so many better movies like this. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The original Space Jam is way better. It just has more heart. And I think the jokes work better in that one. So those are my thoughts on Space Jam, A New Legacy or The New Legacy, an unnecessary sequel that felt way too corporate, but it was not terrible. It was not terrible at all, and it did entertain me in many, many scenes, but you could have trimmed the fat a little bit and made it a better movie. Those are my thoughts. What do you think? Let me know.